Why is my mother's name in your will? Annie set the stack of papers down in front of Daniel Whitmore. The teacup he had just raised stopped halfway to his lips. Daniel looked at her over the rim, as though he needed a few extra seconds to make sure he had heard her correctly. Then he slowly lowered the cup onto its porcelain saucer. It landed with the faintest click. What did you just say? Annie pulled the will toward him, turned to the right page, and placed her finger on a name. I asked why my mother's name is in your will. Daniel looked down. Just beneath the legal language was the name he had written there. Michel Denise Carter. His hand tightened against the edge of the desk. Annie immediately saw the color leave his face. Here. She tapped the page lightly with her fingertip. Michelle Denise Carter. That's my mother. Daniel's head snapped up. Your mother? Yes. Michelle, is your mother? Annie frowned. That's the second time you've asked me. Daniel rose abruptly. His chair slid backward behind him. Are you sure? Annie stared at him in disbelief. Are you asking me if I'm sure the woman who gave birth to me is my mother? Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. I'm sorry. He couldn't finish. Annie pushed another page toward him. Her date of birth is right there. Her old address, too. If you still think it's just someone with the same name, check for yourself. Daniel picked up the page. His eyes stopped on the address. His breath caught. Annie noticed immediately. You know that place? Daniel said nothing. Mr. Whitmore? 8 years ago. He stopped, as though only then realizing he had spoken aloud. Annie narrowed her eyes. What happened 8 years ago? Daniel lowered the page. I had someone search for her at this address. Annie went still. You were looking for my mother? Yes. Why? Daniel didn't answer right away. Annie stepped closer, and before you ask anything else, my mother still lives in Chicago. Daniel looked at her. Chicago? Yes. She's been here all this time. Mr. Whitmore. Annie's voice hardened. You've asked me enough questions. Now it's your turn to answer mine. Daniel slowly looked down at Michelle's name in the will. Your mother and I knew each other once. Knew each other? Almost 19 years ago. Annie paused. What kind of knew each other? Daniel turned toward the windows. We were very close. Annie let out a short laugh without a trace of amusement. Close enough for you to put her in your will 19 years later? Daniel didn't turn around. Yes. Then, very close. Obviously isn't the whole story. He remained silent. Annie crossed her arms. I'm not sitting in one of your board meetings, Mr. Whitmore. You don't have to choose every word so carefully with me. That made Daniel turn. For a moment, he saw Michelle as she had been all those years ago. She used to stand in front of him exactly like that. The same look in her eyes. The same refusal to let him hide behind safe answers. Daniel studied Annie a little longer. She noticed immediately. Why are you looking at me like that? Daniel didn't answer. Annie pulled out her phone. If you still don't believe me, I'll show you. She opened a photograph and held the screen toward him. This is my mother. It was taken a few months ago. Daniel took the phone. Michelle. Her hair was shorter now. Time had left faint lines around her eyes. A few strands of silver rested near her temples. But the smile was the same. The eyes were the same. The woman who had once sat with him until nearly dawn in a small diner, listening to him talk about building a company when he couldn't even afford to fill the gas tank. The woman who had once pressed $12 of her tip money into his hand and told him, You're going to make it, Daniel. Just don't become someone you can't recognize when you do. Mr. Whitmore? Daniel came back to himself. He handed the phone back to Annie with both hands. That's her. Annie didn't take it immediately. So you do know my mother? Daniel looked at her. Yes. How well? He went silent. Annie took the phone from him. There you go again. What? You're about to give me another answer that doesn't actually tell me anything. Daniel lowered his head slightly. I was in love with your mother. Annie didn't move. 1 second passed. Then 2. She blinked. What did you just say? I loved Michelle. Loved her? Yes. The kind of love that makes someone put her name in his will almost 20 years later? Daniel met her eyes. The kind of love that once made me believe I was going to marry her. Annie's arms slowly fell to her sides. My mother never told me any of this. I don't blame her. Why? Daniel turned his face away. Because I failed her. Annie studied him. What happened? Back then, I had almost nothing. The company was just getting started. My family didn't approve of Michelle. And you chose your family? Daniel took several seconds before answering. I didn't choose her when she needed me to. Annie said nothing. Daniel continued, his voice lower now. Then one day, She disappeared. You didn't look for her? I did. For how long? Years. And you never found her? Daniel shook his head. Annie looked down at the will. So that's why you left your money to my mother? Yes. Why? Daniel looked at Michelle's name. Because when I had no money, no status, and no one believed that what I wanted to build would ever become anything, she believed in me. He swallowed. Michelle never asked me for anything. Annie kept her eyes on him. Daniel gave a faint smile, but there was nothing in it except regret. The irony is that by the time I had enough money to give her everything, I no longer knew where she was. Annie watched him for a long moment. Then why didn't you marry someone else and forget about her? Daniel looked at her. I did get married. Annie paused. But I never forgot your mother. For several seconds, Annie didn't know what to say. Then, without thinking, she raised one eyebrow. Daniel froze. He looked at her, really looked at her. The shape of her jaw, the bridge of her nose, the slight pull at one corner of her mouth whenever she was suspicious. And that raised eyebrow, an expression he had seen thousands of times. On his own face, Annie began to grow uncomfortable. What now? Daniel still didn't answer. Mr. Whitmore? Annie. His voice had changed. How old are you? She frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Please. 18. Daniel turned away and braced both hands against the desk. Almost 19 years. He calculated it, then calculated it again. Impossible. But the harder he tried to reject the thought, the more terrifyingly the numbers fit. No. Annie stepped closer. No what? Daniel closed his eyes. When is your birthday? You're starting to worry me. Please. Annie told him. Daniel lowered his head. This time, the fingers gripping the edge of the desk were visibly trembling. Annie watched him, her irritation slowly giving way to unease. I found my mother's name in your will. And now you look like you've just discovered something even bigger than that. Daniel lifted his head. Tell me what's going on. He looked at Annie. I need to see Michelle. Why? Because there's one question only she can answer. Annie tightened her grip on her phone. I'm standing right here. I know. Then ask me. You can't answer this one. Why not? Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Because the question begins before you were born. Annie said nothing. Daniel reached toward the desk phone, then stopped. Give me your mother's number. Annie didn't move. What are you going to say to her? Daniel looked at the photograph of Michelle still open on Annie's phone. I'm going to tell her that her daughter just walked into my office. Annie kept hold of the phone. And then? Daniel looked at her face once more. This time, he no longer saw an intern. He saw a question he had somehow failed to ask for 19 years. Then, his voice turned rough. I'm going to ask your mother whether, on the day she left me. He stopped. Annie held her breath. Daniel forced himself to continue. She took a secret with her that I should have known about. Annie went still. What are you suggesting? Daniel didn't answer. He simply looked at her. Annie saw that the hands of a man famous for never losing control were trembling right in front of her. Slowly, she read out her mother's phone number. Daniel pressed the intercom button. Laura. Yes, Mr. Whitmore? It took him a moment to find his voice again. Call this number for me. Laura wrote it down. Yes, sir. Daniel lowered the phone. Annie stood on the other side of the desk. Neither of them said another word while Laura placed the call. Less than a minute later, Laura's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Whitmore, I have Miss Carter on line 2. Daniel didn't move. His hand was already beside the button, but his finger remained suspended over it, as though pressing it would fling open a door he had kept locked for 19 years. Annie stood on the other side of the desk, watching him. Only a few minutes earlier, this same man had been the one asking her for her mother's phone number. Yet now that Michelle was actually waiting on the other end of the line, he seemed unable to move even a finger. You wanted to talk to my mother? Daniel swallowed. I know. Then answer the call. Daniel glanced at Annie. Then he pressed the button. Michelle? There was no immediate answer, only a brief silence. But to Daniel, it lasted long enough to pull him back almost 20 years. Finally, a woman's voice came through. Who is this? Daniel froze. Just 2 words. Her voice was different now, a little deeper, a little more tired, but he recognized it instantly. Daniel's lips moved. It's me. The other end of the line went silent. Daniel closed his eyes. Daniel. This time he said it more clearly. Daniel Whitmore. A faint breath came through the line. Then Michelle asked, Daniel Whitmore? Annie immediately turned toward him. Her mother had heard only his name and knew exactly who was calling. Daniel lightly gripped the edge of the desk. Yes. Michelle's voice immediately turned colder. Why are you calling me? Daniel looked at Annie. He had imagined this conversation countless times over the years. There had been nights when he thought that if he ever truly found Michelle again, the first thing he would say would be that he was sorry. Other times, he had imagined asking why she had disappeared. But now, after 19 years, the first thing he could actually say was, "Your daughter is in my office." The response came instantly. What? Michelle? Annie is with you? Yes. Is she all right? Yes, she's fine. Put Annie on the phone. Daniel didn't argue. He picked up the receiver and passed it across the desk. Annie took it without taking her eyes off him. Mom? Annie. Michelle's voice became urgent. What happened? Are you okay? I'm fine. Then why is Daniel Whitmore calling me? Why are you in his office? Annie looked at the will lying open on the desk. I just started an internship here and hadn't had a chance to tell you yet. And I found something. There was a pause on the other end. What did you find? Annie rested her hand on the edge of the document. A legal document. Daniel lowered his eyes. Annie continued. Your name is in it. There was no answer. Annie waited. Mom? I'm still here. Your name is in his will. This time the silence lasted longer. Annie tightened her grip on the receiver. Mom? Yes. Why? Michelle didn't answer immediately. Annie looked at Daniel. He was watching her too, but the strain on his face had nearly erased his usual composure. Mom. Why is your name in Daniel Whitmore's will? Annie, this isn't something I can explain over the phone. Annie let out a short, helpless laugh. He just said the exact same thing. Annie. No, Mom. Her voice began to shake. I've been standing here for almost half an hour while one person after another tells me this is complicated, that something else has to wait, that there are questions I don't understand. I don't need one more person telling me to wait. Daniel reached for the receiver. Annie immediately raised one finger. Wait. Daniel stopped. Annie drew a breath. Did you know your name was still in his legal documents after almost 20 years? Michelle went silent. Mom? No. Her voice was much quieter this time. I didn't know. Annie looked at Daniel. He says you two were once going to get married. Daniel turned his face slightly away. Only Michelle's breathing could be heard through the line. Mom? I heard you. Is it true? Another silence. Then Michelle answered. Yes. Just one word. But it turned everything in Annie's mind upside down. She blinked several times. Mom. Annie's voice softened. You were really going to marry him? Yes. Annie closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Why did you never tell me? Because that was a part of my life I decided to leave behind. But it's sitting right in front of me. Annie looked down at the will. This isn't an old photograph. It isn't just a memory. Your name is in his will. Annie, this isn't something I want to explain while you're standing in your boss's office. Annie looked at Daniel. Trust me. He doesn't seem much like my boss right now. Daniel turned toward the window. Michelle was silent for a moment. Is he still there? Yes. Put him back on. Annie looked at the receiver. Then she handed it to Daniel. He took it with one hand but supported it underneath with the other, as though he were afraid he might drop it. Michelle. Her tone changed immediately. Why did you tell Annie? She found the will. You couldn't have called me before telling her anything? She was standing right in front of me asking why your name was in it. And what did you tell her? The truth. Michelle gave a faint laugh. There was no humor in it. You? Daniel frowned. Michelle, after all these years, you finally learned how to answer a question directly? The remark struck a place Daniel couldn't defend. He lowered his head. I deserve that. Michelle said nothing. Daniel continued. But Annie doesn't deserve to be lied to. She also doesn't deserve to have pieces of the truth dropped on her without knowing what story they belong to. I agree. So how much does she know? Daniel glanced at Annie. She knows we were together. Michelle remained silent. She knows I plan to marry you. A heavier breath came through the phone. What else? She knows we haven't spoken since the day you left. Michelle's voice immediately turned cold. You told her I left? Daniel straightened slightly. I told her what I knew. No, Daniel. You told her what you saw. His jaw tightened. What's the difference? A very big one. Then tell me. Annie looked from Daniel to the phone. His voice had lost its usual control. I woke up and you were gone. Your number was disconnected. Your apartment was empty. I looked for you everywhere. And you still think that's the whole story? That was all I had. No. Michelle cut him off. That was all your family allowed you to see. Daniel went completely still. Annie noticed immediately. Michelle, what did you just say? Not over the phone. No. Daniel tightened his grip on the receiver. You can't say something like that and stop there. You've waited 19 years. You can wait another half hour. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, he looked at Annie. Come here. Michelle was silent. I want to see you. I'm at the hospital. I'll send a car. No. Michelle, please. I said no. Daniel stopped immediately. Michelle's voice carried the same firmness Annie had heard throughout her childhood whenever her mother had already made up her mind. I have a car. I can drive myself. Daniel lowered his voice. All right. I'll come as soon as I finish handing off my shift. Thank you. Don't thank me. Michelle paused. I'm not coming for you. Daniel lowered his eyes. I know. I'm coming because Annie is there. I know. And Daniel? Yes? Don't tell her anything else you're not absolutely sure about. Daniel looked at Annie. She stood only a few steps away, her eyes fixed on his face. I won't. Michelle ended the call. Daniel kept the receiver against his ear for another second. Then another. Only then did he finally put it down. Annie looked at him. My mother is angry with you. Daniel exhaled softly. Yes. Very angry. Yes. Do you know why? Daniel looked at her. If I did, maybe we wouldn't be standing here today. Annie frowned. You're avoiding the question again. No. He shook his head. This time I truly don't know. Annie turned back toward the will. She picked it up, then put it down again. Daniel watched her. He noticed Annie unconsciously rubbing the side of her index finger with her thumb. Once. Then again. Daniel looked down at his own hand. All his life, whenever he was anxious but didn't want anyone to notice, he did exactly the same thing. He immediately opened his hand and laid it flat against the desk. Annie caught the movement. What? Daniel looked up. Nothing. There you go again. Doing what? You keep looking at me like there's an answer to some question written on my face. Daniel said nothing. Annie stepped closer. Mr. Whitmore, you've been looking at me like that ever since you found out how old I am. I'm just thinking. About what? Daniel chose his words very carefully. About things I never noticed before. Like what? He looked at her eyes, then the bridge of her nose, her jawline, even the way she tilted her head slightly whenever she didn't believe an answer. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Your mannerisms. Annie frowned. My mannerisms? You raise one eyebrow when you think someone is avoiding a question. Annie immediately raised exactly one eyebrow. Daniel started at her. A smile almost appeared, then died before it fully formed. That. Annie lowered her brow. You're saying I have a habit that's like yours? Daniel paused. Yes. And now you're letting your imagination run wild? I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. Daniel turned away. Annie watched him for several more seconds. You're not going to tell me? Not before your mother gets here. Are you protecting me, or protecting yourself? The question stopped Daniel in his tracks. He turned around. Maybe both. Annie didn't answer. Daniel walked toward the window. Outside, Chicago carried on like any other day. Traffic moved below. Glass windows reflected the afternoon light. A train slipped between the buildings. Only this room seemed trapped in another time. Daniel asked, Does your mother still work at Street Catherine? Annie looked at him immediately. You know where my mother works? No. I guessed. Based on what? The last information I had about Michelle said she was studying to become a nurse. Annie paused. She works at Lakeshore Community Hospital. Daniel turned. She's still a nurse? Yes. Daniel gave a slow nod. Something both painful and gentle passed through his eyes. She did it. Annie heard him. You knew Mom wanted to be a nurse? I was the one who drove her to her first school interview. Annie studied him for a long moment. Then she sat in the chair across from his desk. You really knew my mother. I once did. But you haven't spoken in 19 years? Not once. She never called? No. Never wrote? No. Never asked you for help? Daniel looked at Annie. Michelle would rather work 3 jobs at once than ask someone for something she believed she could earn herself. Annie answered almost immediately. She's still like that. Daniel gave a faint smile. I know. Annie looked down at the will. So that's why you put her name in here? Yes. You thought leaving her money would fix the past? No. The answer came so quickly that Annie looked up. Daniel met her eyes. I never believed money could fix what happened. Then why money? Because it's the one thing I have more than enough of, and yet it has never been able to buy back the one thing I truly wanted. Annie was silent. What was that? Daniel looked out through the glass. One chance to ask her why. Annie watched him for a moment. Then she asked, "Does your wife know?" Daniel turned. "Know what?" "That my mother's name is in your will." Daniel paused. "Catherine knows there are private provisions, but she hasn't read them?" "No." "Does she know who Michelle is?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. "She knows there was someone before her." Annie leaned back in the chair. "Do you love your wife?" Daniel clearly hadn't expected the question. Annie immediately added, "You don't have to answer if you think I'm crossing a line." Daniel shook his head. "No, you have the right to ask. At least today." He pulled out his chair but didn't sit. "Catherine is a good woman. She has been beside me for many years. I respect her, and I won't diminish those years just to make this story sound more romantic." Annie looked at him. "I asked if you love her." Daniel was silent. Then he answered, "There are different kinds of love." "You're choosing your words again." Daniel almost smiled. "Yes." "Then stop." He looked directly at Annie. "No." Annie paused. Daniel continued, "I never loved Catherine the way I loved Michelle." Silence settled between them again. At that moment, Annie's phone vibrated. She looked down at the screen. "A message. Mom, I'm on my way." Annie turned the screen toward Daniel. "My mother's coming." Daniel stared at the words for several seconds. Okay, that was all he could manage. The next 27 minutes passed with strange slowness. Daniel didn't open his computer. He didn't check his phone. He didn't call his assistant. He walked from his desk to the window, then back again. At one point, he picked up his teacup, realized the tea had long since gone cold, and set it back down. Annie sat across from him, sometimes looking at her phone, sometimes at the will. They both had too many questions. Neither of them wanted to ask another one that only the woman on her way there could answer. Finally, there was a knock at the door. Daniel stopped. "Come in." The door opened. Laura stood outside. "Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel immediately straightened. But the moment he saw the woman standing behind Laura, every trace of composure that had returned to his face disappeared. Michelle Carter stood in the doorway. She was still wearing navy hospital scrubs beneath a light coat. Her hospital ID badge remained clipped near her pocket. Her hair was shorter than in the photograph Annie had shown him, and a few strands of silver were more visible at her temples after a long day at work. Michelle didn't look at Daniel first. Her eyes went straight to Annie. "Sweetheart." Annie shot to her feet. "Mum." Michelle stepped inside and crossed the first few feet quickly, looking her daughter over from head to toe as if she needed to make sure for herself that Annie was truly all right. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Michelle exhaled. Only then did she slowly lift her head. Her eyes met Daniel's. 19 years. Not one phone call. Not one accidental meeting. Not one apology. Not one explanation. And now only a few steps separated them. If you can feel the pain Annie is carrying in this moment, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because someone near you may be watching with you. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Daniel opened his mouth. "Michelle." She looked at him. Daniel instinctively took a step forward. Michelle spoke immediately. "Don't." He stopped. The hand he had started to raise slowly dropped back to his side. Don't start with a hug." Michelle's voice wasn't loud, but it left Daniel completely still. "We're not there yet." Daniel lowered his head. "All right." Annie looked at her mother. "Mum." Michelle turned to her. The hardness in her expression immediately softened a little. "What did you find?" Without saying a word, Annie picked up the will. She stepped between them. Then she placed it on the desk. The page was still open to the name, Michelle Denise Carter. Michelle looked down. For one brief moment, her expression changed. Daniel saw it. So did Annie. "You really didn't know about this?" Michelle shook her head. "No." Daniel spoke. "I never told you." Michelle looked at him. "Of course you didn't." The words silenced him. Annie looked at both of them. Then she placed both hands on the edge of the desk. "Enough." Michelle turned toward her. "Annie." "No, Mom." She looked at her mother first, then at Daniel. "I've heard half the story from him." She looked back at Michelle. "And I've heard you refuse to tell me the other half." Annie's voice began to tremble. But she didn't look away from either of them. "I found my mother's name in the will of a man who, this morning, I still thought was just my boss." She pointed toward Daniel. He told me he used to love you. Annie turned to Michelle. You confirmed that the two of you were once going to get married. She stopped and swallowed. Then he looked at my face, asked how old I was, asked when my birthday was, and started shaking like he had just realized something he was too afraid to say out loud. Michelle immediately looked at Daniel. He didn't avoid her eyes. The color in Michelle's face shifted. Annie saw it, and that reaction made her heart pound harder. Mom, Michelle looked at her daughter. You want to know what happened? No. Annie shook her head. Tears had begun to gather in her eyes, but her voice remained clear. I need to know. She pulled the will to the center of the desk, placing it between Daniel and Michelle like a dividing line. Then Annie looked at both of them. All right. She drew in a breath. Now you're both here. Annie placed her hand on the will. Tell me what happened. Michelle kept her coat on. Annie noticed that first. Her mother had driven across Chicago straight from the hospital. Yet she had not even taken the time to sit down. One hand remained near the strap of her purse while her eyes moved between Daniel and the papers on his desk. Tell me what happened, Annie said again. Michelle looked at the will. How much did you read? Enough to find your full name, your birthday, and an address we used to live at. Michelle's expression tightened. You weren't supposed to see that. That seems to be everybody's favorite sentence today. Annie. No, Mom. I've been asking the same question for almost an hour. Why are you in his will? Michelle glanced at Daniel. You really kept my name in it? Yes. For how long? Years. She absorbed the answer without thanking him. That was your decision. Daniel nodded. It was. Annie stepped between their lines of sight. Can we stop talking like I'm sitting through the second half of a movie? Michelle removed her purse from her shoulder and placed it beside the chair. You're right. She sat. Daniel remained near his desk. Michelle noticed. You can sit down, Daniel. I'm Fina. You always said that when you weren't. The familiarity of the remark caught Annie's attention. Daniel sat. Annie took the remaining chair and faced both of them. Start somewhere that makes sense. Michelle folded her hands. Daniel and I met a long time ago. I know that part. He said he wanted to marry you. Michelle looked at him. You told her that? She asked. A trace of disbelief crossed Michelle's face. You've gotten more direct. It took me long enough. Annie looked between them. Were you actually going to get married? Michelle answered this time. We talked about it. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment. I had plans. I hadn't bought a ring yet. Michelle gave him a brief look. You had drawn a floor plan for a house. Daniel almost smiled. On a restaurant napkin, you gave yourself an office bigger than the kitchen. I had priorities. Annie blinked. It was the first time she had heard her mother speak to a man with this kind of history behind every sentence. So you were serious? Yes, Michelle said. What happened? Daniel looked toward Michelle, but she did not pass the question to him. His family didn't approve of me. Annie's voice softened. Because you were black? Michelle took a second before answering. That was part of it. Daniel's jaw tightened. Michelle continued. They also cared about family background, social circles, who knew whom, what kind of future they thought Daniel should have. I didn't fit the picture they had already made for him. Annie looked at Daniel. And what did you do? The question struck harder because it carried no accusation in its tone. She simply wanted the fact. Daniel answered without protecting himself. Not enough. Michelle looked down at her hands. Daniel continued. I defended her when someone said something insulting. I argued with my family. I told myself I was standing up for her. But? Annie asked. But when things became uncomfortable, I kept asking Michelle to give them time. Michelle gave a small nod. A lot of time. Daniel accepted it. Annie turned to her mother. And then you left. Yes. Without telling him? Michelle's eyes met hers. Yes. Why? Michelle took a breath. Because sometimes people can make you feel unwelcome without ever raising their voice. After a while, you stop asking whether they'll accept you. You start asking what staying will cost. Annie's expression changed. Did Daniel ask you to leave? No. Daniel looked at Michelle as if that answer still carried weight after all these years. Annie noticed. Did he know you were leaving? No. Did you say goodbye? Michelle hesitated. Not properly. Daniel's hand moved across the desk. I came home and your apartment was empty. Michelle's face hardened slightly. That isn't the whole story. Then tell me the whole story. I'm trying to tell Annie. Daniel stopped. Michelle turned back to her daughter. I made a decision when I was younger. At the time, I believed it was the safest decision for the life I was trying to build. Annie shook her head. You make it sound like you moved because of a job. It wasn't that simple. Then make it simple enough for me to understand. Michelle looked at her for several seconds. You know, I worked hard to make sure you never felt like something was missing. Annie's face tightened. That doesn't mean something wasn't missing. Michelle's eyes lowered. I know. Daniel looked away. Annie asked, Did you ever try to contact him afterward? Michelle did not answer immediately. Daniel noticed. Michelle? She looked at him. This is not the time. The time for what? For you to turn everything into questions you think deserve immediate answers. Daniel lowered his voice. I searched for you. I know. He stopped. Annie turned toward her mother. You knew? Yes. How? Michelle pressed her lips together. I heard things. Daniel's expression sharpened. From whom? Daniel, not now. You knew I was looking for you and you still didn't contact me? Michelle stood. I came here because Annie needed answers, not because you and I were going to settle 19 years in one afternoon. Daniel rose as well. Then give her the answer she actually needs. Michelle's face changed. Annie saw it. What answer? Neither adult spoke. Annie stood more slowly. Daniel looked at her again. He had tried all afternoon not to follow the thought to its conclusion. But every new detail pushed him closer. Michelle had left 19 years ago. Annie's age fit the timeline. Michelle had known he searched for her. She had still stayed away. And now, standing only a few feet from Annie, Daniel could no longer ignore the resemblance he had somehow missed during the internship. The same shape at the corners of the mouth, the same brow. Even the way Annie held herself when she was angry reminded him of photographs of himself at her age. Daniel turned to Michelle. She knew what he was about to ask. He saw it immediately. Don't, she said. Annie looked between them. Don't what? Daniel's voice came out lower than before. Michelle, I need you to answer one question. Not like this. There may not be a good way to ask it. Daniel, he did not raise his voice. When you left Chicago, were you already pregnant? Annie stopped moving. Michelle closed her eyes. Daniel's face lost what little color had returned since the phone call. Annie looked at her mother. Mom? Michelle opened her eyes again. Annie's voice was quieter now. Were you? Michelle looked at Daniel first, then at Annie. Her hands tightened around the strap of her purse, and for the first time since she had walked into the office, she seemed unable to decide which truth would hurt less. Michelle's eyes stayed on Annie. The choice she had avoided for years was no longer hers to postpone. Yes, she said. Annie's forehead tightened. Yes, what? Michelle swallowed. Yes, I was pregnant when I left Chicago. Daniel gripped the edge of the desk. Annie looked at him, then back at her mother. Pregnant with me? Michelle nodded. Annie took one step away from both of them. Daniel spoke first. Michelle, she turned toward him. He could barely get the question out. Is Annie my daughter? Michelle's face broke in a way Annie had never seen before. She pressed her fingers against her mouth, then lowered her hand. Yes, Daniel. He did not move. Michelle forced herself to continue. Annie is your daughter. Daniel's lips parted, but nothing came out. Annie looked from her mother to Daniel as if each face might contradict what she had just heard. No. Annie, Michelle said. No. You don't get to say my name like that and expect me to understand this. I don't expect you to. You knew? Michelle nodded once. My whole life? Yes. Annie turned toward Daniel. And you? Daniel shook his head immediately. No. You had no idea? None. You never knew she was pregnant? No. Annie looked back at Michelle. He's telling the truth? He didn't know. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them again, he looked at Michelle. Why? Michelle's expression hardened. Don't do that. Why didn't you tell me? I was going to. When? I tried. Daniel caught the word. Tried? Michelle shook her head. Not today. It has to be today. No, it doesn't. My daughter has been alive for 18 years. Annie cut between them. Stop. Both of them turned toward her. She pointed first at Daniel, then at Michelle. Stop saying my daughter like you just discovered a file you misplaced. Daniel's face tightened. Annie continued. And Mom, Stop deciding what I'm ready to hear. Apparently, everyone has been making decisions around me for years. Michelle's shoulders lowered. You're right. I know I'm right. Her voice cracked on the last word, and that seemed to upset her more than anything else. She turned away, walked toward the windows, then stopped. Daniel did not follow. Michelle did not reach for her. Annie folded her arms tightly. Who did you tell me he was? Michelle answered carefully. I never gave you a name. You said my father wasn't part of our life. That was true. That's not the same as saying he didn't know I existed. No. Annie looked at Daniel. Did you ever choose not to know me? His answer came at once. No. Did you ever tell her you didn't want me? No. Did you ever give her money to go away? Daniel's expression changed. Never. Michelle stepped in. He didn't. Annie looked at her mother. Then why did you make the decision for both of us? Michelle took the question without defending herself. Because I was scared. Of him? Not exactly. Of his family? Michelle did not answer, but Annie understood. Daniel did too. He moved away from the desk. My mother spoke to you. Michelle looked at him. That was enough. Daniel's face changed again, not with surprise this time, but recognition. She did. Before you left? Yes. What did she say? Michelle shook her head. We are not doing 19 years of this while Annie is trying to figure out who she is to you. Annie turned around. I know exactly who I am. Michelle's expression softened. Annie continued. I'm trying to figure out who both of you are to me now. Daniel lowered his head. That sentence reached somewhere, money, power, and explanation could not. He walked around the desk, then stopped several feet from Annie. I don't know what you want from me. Neither do I. That's fair. You keep saying things are fair. Daniel nodded. Because I don't want to take another decision away from you. Annie looked at him. For the first time, anger gave way to uncertainty. Daniel continued. If you want me to leave this office, I will. If you want to ask questions, I'll answer them. If you never want to see me outside this building again, I will respect that too. Michelle watched him closely. Annie said, You're a billionaire. You're used to getting what you want. Yes. And if what you want is me in your life? Daniel took a breath. Then wanting it doesn't give me the right to have it. Annie's arms loosened slightly. Daniel looked at Michelle. I spent years wondering why you disappeared. I was angry with you for a long time. I know. I thought you made a choice about us. I did. But not the choice I thought. No. He nodded slowly, then turned back to Annie. I missed everything. Annie's face tightened again. Daniel's voice dropped. Your first day of school. Your birthdays. The nights your mother needed help. Every ordinary Tuesday. I didn't know mattered. He stopped himself. This was not the moment to ask Annie to comfort him. I am not going to make my grief your responsibility. Annie looked down. Daniel took another step forward, then lowered himself onto one knee. Michelle immediately inhaled. Daniel. He did not look away from Annie. She seemed almost alarmed by the sight of him there. Please don't do that. I need to say this without standing over either of you. Daniel looked first at Michelle. I cannot apologize for failing to find a daughter I didn't know existed, but I can apologize for who I was when you needed me to make one thing clear. Michelle's eyes filled. Daniel continued. I should have chosen you loudly enough that no one in my family could make you believe I would be ashamed of you. Michelle looked away. Then Daniel faced Annie. I can't give you 18 years back. Annie whispered. No. I can't buy them back either. Her eyes returned to his. And I won't insult you by trying. Daniel's voice became rougher. If you give me one conversation tomorrow, I'll take one conversation. If you give me dinner next week, I'll take dinner. If all you ever give me is the truth about how angry you are, I'll take that too. Annie wiped one cheek quickly. You don't even know me. No. Daniel nodded. That's the part I want the chance to change. Annie looked at Michelle. Her mother was crying now, though she made no effort to hide it. Mom, did you love him? Michelle looked at Daniel for a long moment. Yes. Do you still? Michelle took a breath. That isn't the question you need answered today. Annie almost protested, then stopped. Daniel slowly stood. Annie looked at the will still resting on his desk. A few hours earlier, it had been nothing more than a stack of legal papers she was supposed to organize. Now one name inside it had rearranged 3 lives. She picked up her phone. I need to go home. Daniel nodded. All right. Michelle reached for her purse. Before they reached the door, Annie turned back. Daniel was still standing beside the desk. Don't change the will. He looked confused. Why? Because I don't want anything from you yet. Daniel understood. Okay. Annie opened the door, then paused. But don't disappear either. Daniel's lips trembled. I won't. And for the first time that afternoon, Annie believed him. The drive home took nearly 40 minutes, and neither Annie nor Michelle turned on the radio. Michelle kept both hands on the wheel while the evening traffic moved south through Chicago. Annie sat beside her with the will still in her bag and her phone face down on her lap. Every few minutes, Michelle seemed ready to speak, but Annie did not invite her to. When they reached their apartment, Annie walked inside first. Michelle set her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door and removed her coat. Do you want something to eat? No. You skipped lunch. I'm not hungry. Michelle nodded. Okay. Annie turned toward her. How long were you planning to keep it from me? Michelle did not pretend she misunderstood. I don't know. That's not an answer. No, it's the truth. Annie folded her arms. 18 years, Mom. I know. You knew who my father was every time I asked. Yes. And every time I filled out a form and left that part blank. Michelle lowered her eyes. Annie continued. Every time someone asked whether I looked like my dad. Every time I wondered if he was dead, married, somewhere across the country, or sitting 10 miles away. I know. No, you know now because I'm saying it out loud. I had to live with not knowing. Michelle took the words without interrupting. After a moment she said, I thought giving you a stable life mattered more than giving you a name that came with complications. It was my name too. Michelle's face changed. Annie's voice softened. But the anger remained. You didn't have to bring him into our life. You could have told me who he was. I was afraid that once you knew, you would go looking for him. Maybe I would have. That was what scared me. Why? Michelle sat at the kitchen table. Because I didn't know what he would do. He didn't even know I existed. I know that now. You knew it then. Michelle looked up. Annie caught the hesitation. You did know? Yes. Then why were you afraid of him? I wasn't afraid of Daniel alone. His family. Michelle nodded. Annie pulled out the chair across from her but remained standing. Did they threaten you? Michelle took a breath. They made their position very clear. What does that mean? It means I was young, pregnant, and being told that I could either walk away or spend years fighting people with money, lawyers, and connections I didn't have. Did Daniel say that? No. Then why didn't you give him the chance to decide? Michelle looked toward the window. That is the part I have to live with. Annie finally sat. For several minutes, neither of them tried to solve anything. Then Michelle said, I am sorry. Annie looked at her. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm not going to tell you I did everything perfectly because I didn't. I made the decision I thought I could survive at the time. And now? Now you get to make your own decisions about him. Annie looked down at her phone. There were no messages from Daniel. She had expected something. That surprised her. He didn't text. Michelle gave a tired half smile. You told him not to disappear. You didn't tell him to follow you home through your phone. Annie almost smiled, but it faded quickly. The next morning, Daniel called at 9. Annie answered from the kitchen. Hey, good morning. Is this an okay time? The question caught her off guard. Yes. I want to ask you something, and you can say no. What is it? A DNA test. Annie glanced toward Michelle, who was pouring coffee. You don't believe her? That isn't why. Then why? Daniel took a moment. Because yesterday you had to rely on 2 people telling you what your own history was. I think you deserve something that does not depend on either of us. Annie said nothing. Daniel continued. If you never want the test, I'll accept that. It won't change how I approach this. You really think I'm your daughter? Yes. No hesitation. Annie looked at Michelle. Her mother nodded once. When? Whenever you choose. Annie agreed. The test was arranged through an independent medical laboratory, not Whitmore Holdings, and Daniel insisted that Annie receive the result directly. Several days later, the report arrived. Annie opened it at home with Michelle beside her. She read the percentages once. Then again, there was no dramatic wording, only clinical language and numbers that did not care how complicated the people reading them felt. The probability of paternity exceeded 99.99%. Daniel Whitmore was her biological father. Annie sat with the paper in her hands. Michelle touched the edge of the table. "You okay?" "I don't know." "That's allowed." Annie gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. "Everyone keeps telling me that, because nobody knows what else to say." Across the city, Daniel received the same result in his office. He did not call anyone at first. He closed the door, sat at his desk, and read Annie Carter's name beside his own. For years, his lawyers had filled documents with numbers large enough to change companies, careers, and entire neighborhoods. None of them had ever affected him like the percentage on one laboratory report. He touched the line identifying him as Annie's father. Laura knocked once and opened the door slightly. "Your 10 o'clock is here." Daniel looked at the clock. "Move it." "To this afternoon?" "Tomorrow." Laura studied his face. "Everything all right?" Daniel looked down at the report. "I have a daughter." Laura stopped. Daniel said it again, quieter this time, as if the words needed to be heard twice before they became real. "I have a daughter." That afternoon he called Annie. She answered after 3 rings. "I got the result," he said. "So did I." Daniel waited. Annie asked, "What happens now?" He could have offered a dozen things immediately. Tuition, a trust, a car, a better apartment, access to anything she might ever need. Those were the answers Daniel Whitmore knew how to provide. But Annie had already taught him that the largest problem in her life did not come with a price tag. "I think," he said. "You tell me what happens now." Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dinner." Daniel sat straighter. "Dinner?" "One dinner. Somewhere normal." A smile reached his face before he could stop it. "You choose the place." "I will." "And Annie?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me tomorrow before I've earned yesterday." Annie did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Don't make me regret it." Daniel looked again at the report. "I'll do everything I can not to." The next evening, Annie chose a diner on the south side with red vinyl booths, chrome trim, and a handwritten pie list taped beside the register. Daniel arrived 7 minutes early and parked his own car 2 blocks away because every space near the restaurant was taken. When he stepped inside, he found Annie already seated near the window with a glass of iced tea. She glanced at his suit. "You know this place serves burgers, right?" Daniel looked down at himself. "I came from the office. You look like you're about to buy the building." I promised not to make an offer before dessert. That earned the first real laugh he had heard from her. Daniel slid into the booth across from her. A waitress approached with 2 menus, recognized Annie, and greeted her by name before turning to Daniel. "Coffee?" "Yes, please." "Regular?" Daniel nodded. Annie waited until the waitress left. "No imported tea?" "I can survive diner coffee." "We'll find out." For several minutes, they talked about ordinary things. Annie told him her internship had another month left. Daniel asked what she planned to study. She wanted a degree that could lead toward corporate law, though she had not decided whether she wanted to become an attorney or work in compliance. "Why that field?" he asked. "Because companies make decisions that affect people who never get invited into the conference room." Daniel considered that. "That sounds like something you've thought about for a while." "I have." Their food arrived. Annie ordered a cheeseburger and fries. Daniel had ordered the same after she accused him of spending too long reading the menu. Halfway through the meal, Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a thin envelope on the table. Annie looked at it. "What's that?" "Something I wanted to discuss." "That sounds dangerous already." "It isn't supposed to." She wiped her hands on a napkin and opened the envelope. Her expression changed as she read. "A college account, a trust, medical coverage, a proposed investment account." The numbers became larger with every page. Annie closed the folder. "No." Daniel had expected questions. "You haven't read all of it." "I read enough." "This isn't payment." "It looks exactly like payment." "It's financial security. For someone you met 3 weeks ago." "For my daughter." Annie pushed the envelope across the table. "There, that." Daniel frowned. "What?" "You said it like the word is supposed to fix the rest." "I didn't mean it that way." "I know you didn't." Daniel took his hand off the envelope. Annie continued. "You found out you had a daughter and your first instinct was to create accounts. I thought I was helping. You're good at money." "Yes. You're good at solving problems with it." "Usually." "I'm not a problem." Daniel's answer came immediately. I know. Then don't treat this like a settlement. The word hit him harder than she intended. She saw it, but did not take it back. Daniel folded his hands on the table. What should I have done? Annie gave him a look. You're asking me how to be my father? I'm asking because I don't know. The honesty changed something between them, Daniel continued. I missed 18 years. I can't pretend I know what you need from me. Annie glanced toward the envelope. I don't need a trust tonight. All right. I don't need a new car. I didn't mention a car. You were going to. Daniel hesitated. Annie raised an eyebrow. He surrendered. Eventually. I knew it. He pushed the envelope toward his side of the table. No car. No apartment. He nodded. No assistant calling me to schedule lunch with you. Daniel almost protested. Laura is very efficient. I'm sure she is. You want me to call you myself? Yes. Daniel took out his phone. I can do that. And don't send somebody to pick me up every time we meet. I can drive. I know. You're 50, not 90. Daniel looked offended for half a second, then laughed. The waitress returned with coffee and topped off his cup. Annie watched him add cream. I thought billionaires drank everything black. Is that a rule? It feels like one. My grandfather drank coffee black. He also considered toast an acceptable dinner. Maybe don't copy everything your family does. Daniel's smile faded slightly. Annie noticed. That was more serious than I meant. No, it was accurate. She studied him. Tell me something that has nothing to do with money. Daniel thought. I hate flying. Annie blinked. Really? Yes. You own a plane. That doesn't make turbulence more enjoyable. She smiled. What else? I can't cook. At all? I can make eggs. That means you can cook one thing. Sometimes I ruin those too. Annie laughed again. Daniel found himself watching the moment without trying to memorize it. For once, he simply let it happen. Your turn, he said. I hate olives. That's not much of a secret. I'm starting small. Fair. She stole one of his fries. Daniel noticed but said nothing. Annie caught him. What? That was mine. You're a billionaire. That doesn't make the fry less mine. She took another one. Daniel shook his head. This relationship is developing badly. For the first time since the DNA result, the word relationship did not sound heavy. After dinner, Annie refused when Daniel tried to pay without looking at the bill. You can pay for dinner, she said, but I'm leaving the tip. Why? Because I picked the place. Daniel accepted the rule. Outside, the evening air had cooled. They stopped near the corner where their cars were parked in opposite directions. Daniel asked, Can I see you again this week? Annie considered it. Maybe lunch Thursday. I have a board meeting. Then Friday. Daniel took out his phone. Annie pointed at it. Don't call Laura. He put the phone away. Friday. She smiled. You're learning. Over the next few days, Daniel discovered that building a relationship with Annie required fewer grand gestures than he had imagined, and far more attention. He texted her himself. Good luck on your presentation today. She replied 3 minutes later. Why did you put a period after today? Are you mad at me? Daniel read the message twice before responding. No. Another message appeared. Then stopped texting like a disappointed principal. Daniel removed the period from his next message. Better? Much. On Friday, he attended her internship presentation from the back of the conference area. He did not introduce himself as her father. He did not interrupt. Annie presented a short analysis of workplace compliance policies, answered 2 difficult questions, and returned to her seat. Only afterward did Daniel approach. You did well. Just well? He understood the challenge. You identified a problem 2 managers missed and answered without reading from your notes. Annie smiled. That's better. Daniel smiled too. Then his expression shifted. There's something I want to ask you. What? Why did your mother think leaving me was safer than telling me about you? Annie's smile disappeared. I don't know. Daniel nodded. But by then, he knew pretending the question did not matter was no longer possible. Somewhere inside Michelle's decision was a part of his own past he had never understood. And if he wanted any chance of becoming the father Annie might someday accept, he would have to learn why her mother once believed Daniel Whitmore was a man she could not trust. Daniel did not ask Michelle that question through Annie. 2 days later, he called her himself. Do you have time for coffee? Michelle answered after a pause. Is this about Annie? It starts with Annie. And ends where? I don't know yet. She agreed to meet at a small cafe near the hospital after her shift. Daniel arrived first and chose a table away from the counter. He wore no tie, only a gray jacket over a white shirt. When Michelle came in wearing dark slacks and a navy sweater, she noticed the 2 coffees on the table. You remembered. 2 creams, no sugar. 19 years is a long time to remember coffee. Apparently not long enough. Michelle sat across from him. Ask what you came to ask. Daniel did not circle around it. Why did you believe leaving me was safer than telling me about Annie? Michelle looked at her cup. Because your family made sure I understood exactly what staying would mean. My family didn't speak for me. You let them. Daniel accepted that without arguing. Michelle continued. Every dinner, every gathering, every polite question was another reminder. What did my parents do? Where did I go to school? Did I feel comfortable in Lake Forest? Did I understand the kind of life you were expected to have? I should have stopped it. You did sometimes. Not enough. No. Daniel looked down at his hands. Was it my mother? Michelle did not answer immediately. He knew before she spoke. Yes. Daniel's jaw tightened. She met with you alone. She asked me to lunch. When? Right before I left. What did she say? Michelle took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down. She said you were close to getting the financing you needed. She said your business could finally become something real. Then she explained what would happen if you kept choosing me. Daniel's voice hardened. What exactly did she threaten? She didn't use threats. That wasn't her style. Michelle looked at him. She said your family would stop helping you. She said people who might invest in you would reconsider. She said your last name opened doors, but those doors could close. Daniel's expression tightened further. And then? She told me that if I loved you, I should not force you to choose. Daniel shook his head once. She had no right. No, but at the time she had something I didn't. What? Certainty. He looked at her. She knew exactly how your world worked. I didn't. I was working long shifts, finishing nursing school, and trying to understand how I was supposed to build a future with a man whose family treated me like a temporary mistake. Daniel lowered his eyes. Michelle continued. Then I found out I was pregnant. His face changed, though he already knew the fact. You found out before you left. Yes. Why didn't you call me? I tried to decide what to do. You were in Street Lewis. I kept telling myself I would wait until you came back. But you didn't. No. Daniel pressed his thumb against his index finger. Michelle noticed. Annie did the same thing. That resemblance no longer surprised him, but it still affected him every time. I left before you came home, Michelle said. I stayed with my cousin for a while. Then I moved again. Daniel looked directly at her. Did you ever try to contact me afterward? Michelle's expression changed. Yes. The answer was so simple that Daniel needed a second. How? A letter. Daniel's brows drew together. What letter? I wrote to you. When? A few weeks after I left. Where did you send it? Your family's house in Lake Forest. Daniel's face drained. Michelle continued. You were moving between places then. I didn't trust the apartment address anymore, and I knew anything sent to Lake Forest would reach you. It didn't. Michelle looked at him carefully. You never got it? No. She searched his face for any sign that he might be hiding something. What did the letter say? Daniel asked. Michelle's voice became quieter. That I was pregnant. Daniel stopped moving. I told you I wasn't asking for money. I told you I hadn't left because I stopped loving you. I gave you an address where you could reach me. He stared down at the coffee between them. Michelle continued. I waited. How long? Months. Daniel looked up, and I never answered. No, because I never saw it. Michelle's eyes tightened. I believed you had. I didn't. She looked away. For years, Michelle had built her understanding of Daniel around the absence of one reply. Daniel had built his around the absence of one goodbye. Neither of them had known a letter existed between those two versions of the past. Daniel reached for his coat. Michelle looked at him. Where are you going? To see my mother. Daniel. He stopped. Don't go there just to be angry. I'm not going there to be angry. That's exactly what you look like you're about to do. He took a breath and set the coat down again. What was the last line? Michelle looked confused. In the letter. What did you write at the end? Her eyes lowered. I remember it. Tell me. Michelle hesitated, then said. I wrote, if you still want us, come find me. Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in his expression had changed. I spent 19 years thinking you didn't want to be found. Michelle looked at him. And I spent 19 years thinking you chose not to come. Daniel left the cafe 20 minutes later and drove north. He did not call Eleanor first. By the time he reached the Whitmore house in Lake Forest, evening had settled over the neighborhood. The same stone entrance stood where it had for decades. The same brass knocker, the same clipped hedges Eleanor insisted were part of maintaining standards. She was in the sitting area when Daniel entered. "Daniel, I wasn't expecting you." "I know." Eleanor set aside the book in her hand. He remained standing. "Did Michelle Carter send me a letter 19 years ago?" Eleanor's expression barely changed, but Daniel saw enough. He stepped closer. "Mother." She looked at him. "Yes." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Did the letter say she was pregnant?" Eleanor did not answer. "That is not a complicated question." Her eyes moved away. "Yes." Daniel's voice dropped. "What did you do with it?" Eleanor folded her hands. "I made a decision I believed was necessary." "What did you do with the letter?" She met his eyes again. "I destroyed it." Daniel remained where he was. 19 years of unanswered questions suddenly had an address, a face, and a person sitting 10 feet away. Eleanor rose. "You became everything I knew you could become." Daniel looked at her. "And you think that makes this acceptable?" "I protected your future." "No." His voice did not rise. "You protected the future you chose for me." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Look at what you built." Daniel nodded once. Then he looked around the house where so many decisions had been made in the name of family. "I am looking." His eyes returned to his mother. "And now I'm finally looking at what it cost." Daniel did not leave Lake Forest immediately. He sat in his car at the end of his mother's driveway with both hands on the steering wheel and watched the dashboard clock change twice before starting the engine. He had arrived wanting one answer. Instead, he was driving away with 19 years rewritten. By the time he reached his house, it was after 9. Catherine was in the dining area with a laptop open beside a half-finished glass of sparkling water. She looked up when Daniel entered through the side door. "You missed dinner." "I know. You could have called." "I should have." She closed the laptop. "What happened?" Daniel removed his jacket and placed it over the back of a chair. He had rehearsed 3 different ways to say it on the drive home. All 3 now sounded dishonest because they tried to soften something that could not be softened. "I found out I have a daughter." Catherine's hand stopped near the laptop. Daniel waited. She looked at him for several seconds. "A daughter?" "Yes." "How old?" "She's 18. Catherine's eyes moved over his face as if checking whether this was a business crisis, a legal claim, or something else entirely. "Did you know?" "No." "Are you sure?" "We did a DNA test." Catherine pushed the laptop aside. "So this isn't someone making an accusation?" "No." "And you only learned about her recently?" "Last week." A small change passed through Catherine's expression. "You waited a week to tell me." "I needed to know what was true before I brought it into our marriage." "Our marriage was already in it, Daniel." "I just didn't know." He accepted that. Catherine stood and crossed to the kitchen counter. She poured herself more water, though the glass was already nearly full. "What's her name?" "Annie Carter." The bottle stopped in Catherine's hand. Daniel noticed. She set it down. "Carter?" "Yes." Catherine looked at him. "Michelle Carter?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Catherine gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course. You knew her name?" "I knew there had been a Michelle." "How?" "You kept a photograph." Daniel's brows drew together. "Years ago," Catherine said, "I was looking for a passport in your desk. I found an old photograph instead, you and a woman outside some diner." Daniel said nothing. "I never asked," Catherine continued. "I figured if you wanted me to know, you would tell me." "I should have." "Yes." There was no sharpness in the answer. That made it harder to hear. Daniel pulled out a chair but remained beside it. "Michelle left before I knew she was pregnant." Catherine looked at him again. "She didn't tell you?" "She tried." "What does that mean?" "She sent a letter to my family's house while I was out of town. My mother received it." Catherine's expression changed. "And?" "She destroyed it." Catherine lowered her glass. "You're serious?" "She admitted it tonight." "Did the letter say Michelle was pregnant?" "Yes." Catherine slowly shook her head. "My God." Daniel looked toward the dark windows. "For 19 years, I thought Michelle chose to disappear. She thought I knew about the pregnancy and chose not to come after her. And Annie grew up between those two misunderstandings. Yes, Catherine took that in. Then she asked the question Daniel had expected much earlier. Does she want money? No. You're sure? She refused it. Catherine gave him a puzzled look. I tried to set up a trust, tuition, some financial protections, and she handed everything back. Daniel almost smiled despite himself. She told me she wanted to know her father, not apply for a settlement. Something in Catherine's face softened. I think I might like her. Daniel looked at her. Catherine sat again. That doesn't mean I know what to do with this. I know. No, I don't think you do. She folded her hands on the table. For 14 years, I have been married to you. We have hosted dinners together, attended funerals together, gone through surgeries, family obligations, company crises. I know which tie you wear when you're nervous and which side of the bed you move toward when you can't sleep. Daniel lowered his eyes. Catherine continued. But there has always been a part of you I could never reach. Catherine, let me finish. He did. I used to think that was simply who you were. Some people keep one door closed. I learned to live with it. She looked toward his jacket. Now I'm wondering whether there was someone behind that door the whole time. Daniel did not insult her with a quick denial. Yes, he said. Catherine's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. You still love Michelle. Daniel looked down at the table. I never stopped caring about her. That wasn't what I asked. He met her eyes. No, he said quietly. I never stopped loving her. Catherine nodded once as though hearing confirmation of something she had known long before tonight. And me? Daniel struggled with the answer because Catherine deserved something better than a polite lie. I respect you. I care about you deeply. You're describing a good business partner. That isn't fair. It's accurate. Daniel sat across from her. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. The answer surprised him. Catherine continued. That may actually be part of the problem. You treated me well. You were considerate. You were generous. You never humiliated me. She gave a tired smile, but being treated well is not the same as being loved. Daniel had no defense. Catherine looked toward the hallway, then back at him. What happens now? I don't know. Are you changing the will? I'll have to reconsider it. Catherine's expression tightened, but she did not look shocked. I'm not asking because I think Annie should get nothing. Daniel waited. I'm asking because this affects everything we built together. I will protect what is legally and financially yours. That isn't the only thing I'm worried about. What are you worried about? Catherine looked at him for a long moment. That you're going to wake up tomorrow and try to repair 18 years in 18 days. Daniel said nothing. You're good at taking control when something breaks, she continued. This isn't a company. Annie isn't an acquisition. Michelle isn't a mistake you can correct with the right offer. I'm learning that. Learn faster. The directness almost sounded like Annie. Daniel noticed the irony but kept it to himself. Catherine picked up her glass. And whatever happens between you and me, don't let anyone in this family make Annie pay for decisions made before she was born. Daniel looked at her. You mean my mother? I mean anyone. Catherine held his gaze. She walked into your life without choosing the history that came with your name. If you're really going to be her father, start there. Daniel nodded. I will. Catherine opened her laptop again but did not look at the screen. Daniel understood that the conversation was finished for tonight. As he picked up his jacket, she spoke once more. Daniel, he turned. When the rest of the world finds out, they won't be as careful with her as we were tonight. Daniel stopped. Catherine looked down at the dark screen of her laptop. And with your name involved, the rest of the world usually finds out. Catherine's warning proved accurate before noon the next day. Annie was halfway through a compliance briefing when her phone began vibrating against the conference table. Once, then again, then almost continuously. She ignored it until the junior analyst beside her glanced at his own screen and quickly turned it face down. Something in his expression made her reach for hers. There were 11 messages. The first came from a friend. Annie, don't open social media until you call me. The second contained a screenshot from a business news site. Black intern identified as billionaire Daniel Whitmore's secret daughter. Annie read the headline twice. Below it was a photograph of Daniel leaving Whitmore Holdings and another image taken from Annie's public college profile. The article claimed that an unnamed source close to the company had confirmed a recent paternity test. The wording became worse farther down. Questions remain about how Carter obtained a coveted position inside Whitmore Holdings before her connection to the CEO became known. Annie locked the phone. The analyst beside her shifted in his chair. Annie, don't. I was just going to ask if you're okay. I know. She appreciated the concern. She simply did not know how to receive it while 20 people around the table were pretending not to know exactly what had appeared on their phones. The meeting ended early. Outside the conference area, 2 interns stopped talking when Annie passed. Near the elevators, someone she barely knew gave her a sympathetic smile that felt worse than curiosity. Then Tyler, another intern, caught up with her. So is it true? Annie kept walking. Which part? That Whitmore is your dad. She pressed the elevator button. Yes. Tyler blinked. Wow. The doors opened. He followed her inside. So, are you rich now? Annie turned toward him. I was the same person on Thursday. His face reddened. I didn't mean it like that. I know. She stepped out at the executive floor. By the time Annie reached Daniel's office, his communications team was already there. Daniel stood at the end of the conference table while 2 attorneys, the head of public relations, and Laura reviewed printed copies of the article. He saw Annie and immediately ended the discussion. Give us a minute. Everyone left except Laura, who hesitated. Annie shook her head. She can stay. Daniel nodded. I'm sorry. Annie dropped her phone on the table. Did this come from you? No. Your mother? I don't know. Catherine? No. The certainty in his answer made Annie pause. You're sure? Yes. Then somebody who knew about the DNA test talked. We're finding out who had access. Annie crossed her arms. And while you find out, apparently, I'm a headline. Daniel looked at the article again. I can have our legal team request corrections. Corrections to what? The implication that you received the internship because of me. That's not the only implication. Daniel understood. Annie unlocked her phone and placed it in front of him. A social media post had collected thousands of comments. Some called Michelle an opportunist. Others suggested she had waited until Daniel became wealthy before revealing Annie. One comment read, Of course, the intern got upstairs. Connections always find a way. Another questioned whether Annie had earned anything she had achieved before Whitmore's name became public. Daniel's jaw tightened. Stop reading these. No. Annie, if people are saying it about me, I get to know what they're saying. You don't have to absorb every stranger's opinion. I'm not worried about every stranger. She pointed at the screen. I'm worried about how fast people decided my mother wanted your money. Nobody asked whether she ever contacted you. Nobody asked how I got the internship. They saw a black woman, a billionaire, and money, and filled in the rest themselves. Daniel did not interrupt. Annie continued. And now every person downstairs is going to wonder whether I earned my badge. You did. I know that. Her voice sharpened. The problem is that knowing it myself doesn't stop people from questioning it. Laura spoke from near the door. For what it's worth, the internship records are clear. Annie applied through the university partnership. Her application was scored before anyone on this floor met her. Annie looked at her. Thank you. Daniel turned to Laura. Get copies of the application timeline and selection records. Annie looked at him. What are you doing? Correcting the record. Good. He seemed surprised by the answer. Annie picked up her phone. Because if your plan was to make the story disappear, don't. Daniel studied her. You want it addressed publicly. I want the lies corrected publicly. His phone rang. Michelle. Daniel answered and put it on speaker after asking permission. Daniel, where is Annie? I'm here, Mom. Michelle's voice changed immediately. Come home. Annie closed her eyes. Mom, your picture is everywhere. I know. Then come home. I'm not leaving because somebody wrote an article. This is bigger than one article. And if I walk out now, what do you think they'll say? I don't care what they say. I do. Michelle exhaled. Annie, I spent years keeping our life away from this kind of attention. And it found us anyway. That doesn't mean you have to stand in the middle of it. Annie glanced at Daniel. Maybe I do. Daniel said nothing. Michelle's voice softened. You don't have anything to prove. This isn't about proving I'm Daniel Whitmore's daughter. Then what is it about? Annie looked through the glass wall toward the desks beyond Daniel's office. It's about not letting somebody else decide why I'm here. Michelle did not answer immediately. Daniel understood the sentence better than Annie knew. 19 years earlier, He had allowed other people to define what Michelle's presence meant in his life. He had called his hesitation patience. He had told himself time would fix prejudice without requiring him to confront it. Time had fixed nothing. Daniel spoke. "Michelle, I won't put Annie in front of cameras. I won't use her to defend me or the company." "Then what are you going to do?" He looked at Annie. "I'm going to tell the truth." After the call ended, Daniel's communications director returned with a draft statement. Daniel read the first paragraph. "Whitmore Holdings considers matters concerning Mr. Whitmore's family to be private and will not comment on speculation regarding—" "No." The director stopped. "No?" Daniel pushed the page back. "That statement protects me. That's the intention." "It's the wrong intention." The director looked uncertain. "What would you like instead?" Daniel glanced at Annie. She did not tell him what to say. That mattered. He turned back to the communications director. "State that Annie Carter entered the internship program through the same independent selection process as every other participant. Provide the dates. Provide the review procedure. Confirm that I had no involvement in her placement." "And the paternity issue?" Daniel took a breath. "That comes from me." The director's expression changed. "Personally?" "Yes. Mr. Whitmore, we should consider the market impact before you make any public declaration." Daniel almost recognized the old temptation. Protect the company. Protect the family name. Wait until the uncomfortable part passes. He looked at Annie. She was watching him, not asking for protection, only watching to see what kind of man he would be when silence became convenient. Daniel picked up the useless draft statement and folded it once. 19 years ago, I considered the cost of speaking when I should have considered the cost of staying quiet. He set the paper down. I'm not making that mistake again. By 3 that afternoon, every seat in the Whitmore Holdings media room had been taken. Daniel stood behind a closed door with Laura, the communications director, and 2 attorneys. Through the wall came the muffled movement of reporters settling into place and technicians checking microphones. The communications director held a final statement in both hands. "We can still keep this narrow, confirm the internship process, decline to discuss the family matter, then leave." Daniel adjusted one cuff. "No." One of the attorneys stepped forward. "Daniel, once you confirm paternity publicly, there's no taking it back." "There's nothing to take back. We're discussing exposure." "I know what we're discussing." The attorney lowered his voice. "Board members are already calling. Investors are asking whether this affects succession planning." Daniel looked at him. "Annie learned who her father was less than 2 weeks ago, and people are already calculating what she means to a balance sheet." "That isn't what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant. You were simply more polite about it." Laura glanced at the clock. 2 minutes. Daniel's phone vibrated. A message from Annie. "You don't have to defend me like I can't defend myself." Daniel read it once, then typed, "I know." A second message appeared. "Then don't make this about saving me." He answered, "I won't." He put the phone away. The communications director asked, "Is Annie coming?" "No." "Michelle?" "No." "That may raise questions. They are not visual evidence for my statement." Laura gave him a brief nod. The door opened. Daniel walked to the podium alone. Camera shutters began immediately. Reporters called his name, but he waited until the microphones were ready. "Good afternoon. I'll make a statement, then I'll take a limited number of questions." The room settled. Daniel placed no notes on the podium. "An article published this morning identified Annie Carter, a Whitmore Holdings intern, as my biological daughter. That information is true." The cameras started again. Daniel continued, "I learned recently that Annie is my daughter. I had no knowledge of that fact when she applied to our internship program, when her application was reviewed, or when she was assigned to this office." A reporter raised her hand, but Daniel continued, "Her application entered through our university partnership. It was scored through the same process used for every applicant. I had no role in selecting her." He paused. "There is another claim circulating that deserves a direct answer. Annie's mother, Michelle Carter, did not contact me seeking money, employment, access, or recognition. She has never asked me for any of those things." A reporter called, "Then why was Miss Carter named in your will?" Daniel's eyes moved toward the voice. "Because I put her there." More cameras lifted. "How long ago?" "Years before Annie entered this company." "Why?" Daniel could have stopped there. His legal team had told him that personal history created unnecessary risk. His board had recommended speaking only to verifiable facts. But the ugliest part of the public story was not built from missing facts alone. It was built from an old assumption that a woman like Michelle must have been reaching upward, chasing money, status, or access. Daniel knew where that kind of assumption led because he had once watched his own family make it. Michelle Carter knew me before Whitmore Holdings was successful, he said. She knew me when my business was uncertain, when financing was difficult, and when there was very little anyone could gain by staying close to me. A reporter asked, "Were you romantically involved?" "Yes." "Were you engaged?" "No, but I intended to marry her." The answer changed the energy in the room. Daniel continued before another question could come. "Michelle and I separated nearly 19 years ago. I did not know she was pregnant when we separated. I did not know Annie existed until recently." "Are you saying Miss Carter deliberately hid your daughter from you?" Daniel's expression hardened. "No," the reporter tried again. "But she didn't tell you. This is exactly why I'm standing here." Daniel rested both hands on the podium. "People are already rushing to assign motives to Michelle because that makes the story easier. She was a black woman in a relationship with a man from a white family that cared too much about reputation, class, and appearances." The room grew more focused. "My family made it difficult for her to believe she had a place beside me." Another reporter asked, "Are you accusing your family of racism?" Daniel took a breath. "I am saying race was part of how Michelle was judged. Pretending otherwise now would be another form of dishonesty." He looked directly toward the cameras. "And I am also saying that 19 years ago, I was not brave enough to make sure she knew I would stand beside her no matter who objected." No attorney could soften that once spoken. Daniel did not want it softened. A reporter near the front asked, "Did your family pressure her to leave?" "There were conversations I did not know about at the time. I'm still learning everything that happened." "Will you name who was involved?" "Not today." "Why not?" "Because telling the truth does not require me to turn every personal failure into public entertainment." The reporter lowered his hand. Daniel continued, "If anyone wants to question Annie's qualifications, the company will release the internship selection timeline and review procedure this afternoon. Read them. If anyone wants to say Michelle waited until I became wealthy to come back, understand this. She did not come back to me. I found out because Annie happened to see her mother's name in a legal document." He stopped for a moment. "The easiest thing for me today would have been to call this a private family matter and say nothing else." His gaze moved across the reporters. 19 years ago, I made a version of that choice. I believed avoiding conflict would give everyone time to adjust." He shook his head. "Silence did not protect the woman I loved. It only made other people's prejudice easier to live with." A woman in the second row asked, "What do you say to people who believe Annie will now benefit from being Daniel Whitmore's daughter?" Daniel answered without hesitation, "I would say she has spent her life becoming Annie Carter. She does not need my last name to make her accomplishments legitimate." The press conference ended 12 minutes later. Daniel stepped away from the podium while reporters continued calling questions. Back in his office, Laura handed him his phone. One message. It was from Annie. I watched. Daniel waited before opening the next one. "You didn't make me sound helpless." Another message followed. "And you didn't hide, Mom." Daniel sat at his desk and typed carefully. "I should have done that for her 19 years ago." Annie replied, "Then keep doing it now." Daniel looked at those 5 words for a long time. Across state lines, in a modest house in Wisconsin, a retired attorney named Henry Collins had watched the same press conference. When Daniel said he had never known Michelle was pregnant, Henry slowly set down his coffee. He walked to the basement, opened an old metal filing cabinet, and pulled out a box marked Whitmore Family Closed. Inside was a copy of a letter he had spent 19 years assuming Daniel had already read. Henry sat on the bottom stair and unfolded it. Near the end, one line remained clear despite the faded paper. "If you still want us, come find me." Henry reached for his phone. Henry Collins called Whitmore Holdings at 8:12 the next morning. Laura answered on the 3rd ring. "Whitmore Holdings, Executive Office. My name is Henry Collins. I need to speak with Daniel Whitmore. May I ask what this concerns?" Henry looked at the folded letter on his kitchen table. "Michelle Carter." Laura's tone changed slightly. "One moment." Daniel was already in his office when the call transferred. "Daniel Whitmore." Henry recognized the voice from the press conference, though he had not spoken to Daniel in more than a decade. "Mr. Whitmore, my name is Henry Collins. I used to work with your family's legal counsel. Daniel straightened. What year? 19 years ago and several years after that. Daniel's hand tightened around the phone. You said this concerns Michelle Carter. Yes. What do you know? Henry took a breath. I have something you need to see. Daniel did not ask him to explain further. Where are you? Wisconsin. I can send someone. No. I think I should bring it myself. Daniel looked toward the city outside his office. When can you be here? I'm already packed. Henry arrived shortly after noon carrying a brown leather briefcase that had seen better decades. His gray hair was neatly combed, his suit older but carefully pressed. Laura showed him into Daniel's office, then left after Daniel asked for privacy. Henry remained near the desk. Thank you for seeing me. You drove from Wisconsin. Sit. Henry took the chair opposite him and placed the briefcase on his knees. Daniel did not waste time. You heard the press conference. I did. And you heard me say I never knew Michelle was pregnant. Yes. Henry opened the briefcase. That is why I came. He removed a clear protective sleeve containing several sheets of faded paper. Daniel recognized Michelle's handwriting before Henry even placed it on the desk. His body reacted before his mind did. He reached for the letter, then stopped. Where did you get this? It's a copy. A copy of what? The letter Michelle Carter sent to the Whitmore residence 19 years ago. Daniel looked at Henry. My mother told me she destroyed it. She may have destroyed the original. Daniel picked up the pages. Why does this exist? Henry shifted in his chair. Because your mother gave the letter to the firm before she destroyed it. Daniel's eyes lifted from the paper. For what purpose? She wanted legal advice. What kind of legal advice? Henry took a moment. She wanted to know what exposure the family might face if Michelle later made a financial claim, requested support, or contacted the press. Daniel's expression hardened. Michelle said in the letter she wanted no money. Yes. You read it? Yes. And you still prepared that advice? I was an associate attorney. I was told to review the situation and summarize possible risks. Daniel looked down at the pages again. How old were you? 53. Daniel gave him a short look. So you weren't a young man who didn't know better. Henry accepted the rebuke. No. Daniel began reading. Michelle had written plainly. There were no threats, no demands, no legal language. She explained that she had left because she believed Daniel would eventually be forced to choose between her and the future everyone expected him to build. She admitted she had been afraid. Then, several paragraphs later, came the sentence that made Daniel's fingers stop moving. I'm pregnant. He read the line again. The next paragraph was worse. I am not asking you for money, Daniel. I never wanted that from you. I need to know whether the future we talked about was real to you, because it was real to me. Daniel pressed his lips together. Henry did not interrupt. Daniel continued until he reached the final lines. I will stay at the address below for a while. If you want us, come find me. Daniel lowered the pages. For several seconds, he looked only at the address Michelle had written beneath her name. She waited there. Henry nodded. Yes. And nobody came. No, because nobody told me. Henry's voice was quieter. No. Daniel stood and walked to the windows. So, my mother didn't just keep the letter from me. She took it to lawyers. Yes. She treated my future daughter like a liability before I even knew she existed. Henry looked down. That is a fair description. Daniel turned. Why did you keep a copy? The firm scanned everything connected to active client advice. Years later, when the firm closed, I took several archived files that involved unresolved ethical questions. Ethical questions? Henry nodded. I had told myself for years that you already knew. Daniel studied him. Why? Because your mother spoke as if the family had discussed it. She lied to you. Maybe. Daniel's face sharpened. Henry corrected himself. No, she did. Daniel returned to the desk. When did you realize I didn't know? Yesterday. At the press conference. Yes. Henry folded his hands. When you said Michelle had never asked you for anything and that you had no idea she was pregnant, I understood that I had spent 19 years assuming something because it was easier than checking. Daniel looked at the letter. You could have checked. I could have. You could have called me. I should have. Why didn't you? Henry met his eyes. Because I told myself it wasn't my family. Daniel's expression did not soften. Henry continued. That was the excuse. The truth is that I worked for powerful people, and I learned to call silence professionalism. Daniel looked back at Michelle's handwriting. Henry added, I'm not asking you to forgive that. No, I came because the letter should have reached you once. I couldn't justify stopping it a second time. Daniel read the final line again. If you want us, come find me. His phone vibrated. A message from Annie. Lunch Friday still good? Daniel looked at the screen, then at the letter. For 18 years, Annie had lived inside the consequence of a decision made by people who believed status gave them the right to control information, relationships, even time. He typed back, Yes, I'll be there. Henry rose slowly. There's something else you should know. Daniel looked up. What? Your mother asked the firm to prepare a draft response in case Michelle contacted you again. Daniel's face changed. Do you still have it? Yes. What did it say? Henry hesitated. That the Whitmore family would regard any future contact as an attempt to interfere with your career and reputation. Daniel lowered the letter. And if Michelle asked for support? The draft suggested all communication go through counsel. Daniel let out a breath through his nose. They built a wall around me and told themselves it was protection. Henry nodded. Daniel looked at him. Silence doesn't stay neutral forever, Mr. Collins. I know. No. You know now. Henry accepted that too. Daniel placed the letter carefully inside its sleeve. When people have more power than someone else, they like to think doing nothing keeps their hands clean. Henry picked up his briefcase. And it doesn't. No. Daniel looked again at Michelle's final sentence. It just means someone else pays for what they refuse to do. After Henry left, Daniel called Laura. Cancel my first meeting tomorrow. Board review? Yes. May I ask why? Daniel looked at the copied letter on his desk. I'm going to Lake Forest. Laura paused. Your mother? Yes. Daniel slid the letter into his coat pocket. This time, he was not going there to ask what happened. He was going there with proof. Daniel arrived at Lake Forest just after 9 the next morning. Eleanor was already dressed, seated near the tall windows with a cup of coffee and the financial section folded beside her. She looked up when he entered, then noticed the clear sleeve in his hand. You canceled a board meeting for this? Yes. That seems unnecessary. Daniel placed the copied letter on the table between them. Eleanor's eyes moved to Michelle's handwriting. For the first time since he had entered, her expression changed. Where did you get that? Henry Collins. Eleanor looked up sharply. Henry had no right to give you confidential material. Daniel pulled out the chair across from her. That's what concerns you? I'm saying there are legal obligations. My daughter has been alive for 18 years, Mother. Eleanor's mouth tightened. And your first response is attorney-client privilege? I already admitted I intercepted the letter. No, you admitted you destroyed it. Daniel tapped the plastic sleeve with one finger. You didn't tell me you took it to lawyers first. Eleanor said nothing. You asked them how to protect the family if Michelle tried to contact me again. I asked for advice. You asked them to treat her pregnancy as a risk. That is not what I said. It's what you did. Eleanor rose and walked toward the sideboard. Daniel stayed seated. She poured herself more coffee, though she had barely touched what was already in the cup. You're looking at this through the emotions of the present. I'm looking at it through facts. You were 31. Your business was unstable. You had one serious investor and a family name that was opening doors you could not afford to lose. And Michelle? Eleanor turned. What about her? She was carrying Annie. I know that now. You knew it then. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Daniel stood. Say her name. What? Annie. Eleanor looked irritated. Daniel. Don't turn this into theater. Say her name. A pause. Annie. Good. Because for 19 years, you've talked about decisions, risks, futures, investors, reputation. There was a person at the end of all those decisions. I did what I believed was best for you. Daniel nodded slowly. That sentence has protected you from yourself for a long time. Eleanor set the coffee down. You came here to condemn me. Fine. Do it. But do not rewrite who you were. You wanted success. I did. You wanted independence. Yes. You wanted to prove you could build something without relying on your father. Yes. And you did. Daniel looked around the house. Old family photographs lined the shelves. University portraits, wedding pictures, corporate awards. Generations of Whitmores arranged in polished frames. You keep pointing to everything I gained because you refuse to look at what I lost. Eleanor's expression hardened. You didn't lose your career. No. You didn't lose your future. Daniel looked at her. I lost 18 birthdays. She stopped. I lost every first day of school, every Thanksgiving dinner, every ordinary Sunday afternoon when Annie might have complained about homework or asked for a ride somewhere. I lost the chance to know what made her laugh before she learned how to hide when something hurt. Eleanor's eyes shifted away. Daniel continued, "You didn't steal money from me. You stole ordinary days. That was never my intention. Intentions don't return time. I was protecting my son. You were controlling him." Eleanor's face tightened. "There is a difference. Yes, protection respects a person's right to choose. Control removes it." She crossed her arms. "You think Michelle would have made your life easy? No. You think the board would have welcomed her? No. You think certain investors would have ignored what people were saying? No. Then perhaps I understood the world better than you did." Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "You understood prejudice and decided to cooperate with it." Eleanor's mouth opened slightly. "I did not teach those people how to think. You didn't have to. You simply made sure they never had to change. That is unfair." "No. What was unfair was Michelle being asked to carry everyone else's comfort on her shoulders." Eleanor looked toward the windows. "I never hated her." Daniel gave a short, tired breath. "That almost makes it worse." She turned back. "How?" "Because if you had hated her, at least you could admit what drove you. Instead, you convinced yourself that removing her was practical. I thought you would move on." "I tried." "And Catherine?" Daniel's expression changed. "Do not use my marriage as evidence that you were right. I'm asking a reasonable question. Catherine deserved a husband who had made peace with his past. I married her because I thought the past was over. It wasn't." Eleanor studied him. "You still love Michelle." Daniel did not answer the question directly. "This is not about whether Michelle and I ever find our way back to each other." "Then what is it about?" "Annie." Eleanor looked away again. Daniel stepped closer to the table. "You don't get to decide what relationship you have with her. I'm her grandmother. Biology gives you a fact. It does not give you access." Eleanor's eyes returned to him. "You would keep her from me?" "No." Daniel shook his head. "I'm telling you something you never gave me. The choice is hers." Eleanor seemed ready to argue, then stopped. "If she wants to meet you, I won't interfere. If she doesn't, you will respect that. And if she has been turned against me?" Daniel's expression sharpened. "No one needs to turn her against what happened. The truth is enough." Eleanor sat again. For the first time, she looked older than Daniel usually allowed himself to notice. "What do you want from me?" He considered the question. "Nothing today." "Then why come?" "So you understand the rules have changed." "What rules?" "You no longer speak for me. You do not contact Annie behind my back. You do not call Michelle. You do not involve the family attorney, the company, or anyone else to manage this." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. "And if I want to apologize? Then you wait until Annie decides she wants to hear it." Eleanor lowered her eyes to the letter. Daniel picked it up. Before turning away, he stopped. "Justice doesn't always return what was taken." Eleanor looked at him. "Sometimes all it can do is stop the taking from continuing." Daniel left the house without another argument. Outside, his phone showed a new message from Michelle. "Annie invited you to the honors ceremony Saturday. She says there's a seat if you want it." Daniel read the message twice. Then he typed back, "Tell her I'll be there." Michelle replied almost immediately, "She told me to tell you one more thing." Daniel waited. "No VIP section. Sit with everyone else." A smile crossed his face. He put the phone in his pocket and walked toward his car. For once, being treated like an ordinary father felt like the greatest privilege he had ever been offered. Saturday morning, Daniel arrived 20 minutes early and spent 12 of them looking for parking. The honors ceremony was being held in an auditorium connected to Annie's university program, and the lot was already crowded with sedans, pickup trucks, minivans, and people carrying flowers or folded programs. Daniel drove past an open space near the entrance marked reserved for event sponsors, kept going, and finally found a place near the far end of the lot. He checked Michelle's message once more before getting out. "No VIP section. Sit with everyone else." Daniel smiled and put his phone away. Inside, volunteers directed guests toward rows of folding seats. A man in front of Daniel complained about the price of downtown parking while his wife tried to convince him that they were already inside and there was no point discussing it anymore. 2 rows ahead, someone struggled with the camera settings on a phone. Daniel found an empty seat near the back. No company representative had reserved it. No assistant had arrived early. No one asked whether he needed better access. He sat down and opened the printed program. Annie Carter's name appeared halfway down the second page. Daniel ran his thumb lightly beneath it. A woman sitting beside him glanced over. "Someone in your family?" Daniel looked toward the stage. "My daughter." The answer came naturally enough to surprise him. The woman smiled. "First time at one of these?" "Yes." "You'll want pictures?" Daniel took out his phone. She looked at the screen. "Not from down there. Hold it higher when she walks up." Daniel nodded with complete seriousness. "Thank you." A few minutes later, Michelle entered and took a seat several rows closer to the front. She saw Daniel, gave him a small nod, then turned toward the stage. He understood. This was not their day. When the ceremony began, Daniel listened to names, introductions, and brief remarks about academic work, leadership, and community service. He had attended hundreds of corporate presentations where applause came on schedule and people measured every sentence for advantage. This felt different. The people around him were simply proud. When Annie's name was called, Daniel sat straighter. She walked onto the stage in a dark blue dress and accepted her certificate from the program director. The applause around Daniel rose. He joined it. For half a second, Annie looked toward Michelle. Then her eyes moved farther back. She found Daniel. He did not wave. He only smiled. Annie smiled too. It was brief, but Daniel carried it through the rest of the ceremony. Afterward, people filled the lobby and sidewalk outside. Daniel waited near a brick column while Annie spoke with classmates and took photographs with Michelle. He did not interrupt. Eventually, Annie noticed him. She walked over holding her certificate against her side. "You came. You invited me. I thought you might send flowers instead. I considered it." "Of course you did. I was advised to behave like a normal person." "By who?" "Several people independently." Annie laughed. Daniel looked at the certificate. "Congratulations." "Thank you. You did well." "You couldn't hear anything I said. I was on stage for maybe 15 seconds. I was referring to the part where you didn't trip." Annie looked offended. "Your expectations are improving." Michelle approached with her purse over one shoulder. "Daniel." "Michelle, you found parking?" "Eventually." Annie looked at her mother. "He didn't use the sponsor space." Michelle raised an eyebrow. "Growth." Daniel put one hand over his chest. "I'm surrounded." The lightness lasted a few moments. Then Annie's expression changed. "Can we walk?" Daniel nodded. Michelle touched Annie's arm briefly. "I'll wait by the car." Annie and Daniel headed along the sidewalk bordering the campus lawn. Groups of graduates and guests passed them in both directions. Somewhere behind them, someone called for another family photo. Annie walked with both hands around the rolled program. "Mom told me something." Daniel waited. "She said you used to believe in her before anyone believed in you." Daniel looked ahead. "That isn't exactly how I remember it." "How do you remember it?" "She believed in me first." Annie turned toward him. "She said you used to sit in a diner and work on business plans." "I did." "Were they good?" "Most of them were terrible." Annie smiled. "That actually makes me feel better." "Why?" "Because everyone talks about you now like you had everything figured out." "I didn't." "You still don't." "That part has become increasingly obvious." They walked a few more steps. Then Annie asked, "Did you love her?" Daniel did not pretend he needed clarification. "Yes." "How much?" He looked toward Michelle in the distance. "Enough that losing her changed the way I understood the rest of my life." Annie's expression softened. "Do you still love her?" Daniel took a breath. "Yes." "You say that pretty easily." "It took me 19 years to say it honestly." "I don't think that counts as easy." Annie looked down at the program. "Does she know?" "I think she does." "Are you going to try to get her back?" Daniel smiled slightly at the bluntness of the question. "I'm going to respect whatever she wants." "That's a very careful answer." "It's also the truth." Annie looked ahead again. Then she asked the question that changed his expression. "Would you have been ashamed of me?" Daniel stopped walking. Annie stopped too. "Because of me being black," she added. "Because of your family." "Because of the company." "Whatever." "No." The answer came too quickly to be rehearsed. Annie watched him. Daniel continued. "I would never have been ashamed of you. But you let them make Mom feel like she was something you had to defend." His face tightened. "Yes. So what's the difference?" Daniel looked at her for several seconds before answering. "The difference is that I wasn't ashamed of Michelle. I was afraid of conflict with the people who were." Annie said nothing. And that fear still hurt her, Daniel continued. Intentions don't excuse the result. He looked down briefly. 19 years ago, I thought staying reasonable made me a better man. Sometimes being reasonable is just another way of asking the person with less power to keep absorbing the cost. Annie's grip loosened on the program. Daniel looked back at her. If I had known about you, I would have wanted you in my life. But wanting that now doesn't erase the man I was then. Annie nodded slowly. Mom says people can change. Your mother is generous. She also says apologies are useless if nothing changes after them. That sounds more like her. Annie smiled. They began walking again. Near the parking lot, Daniel's phone vibrated. He reached for it automatically, then stopped. Annie noticed. Aren't you going to check that? No. Why? Daniel looked at her. Because I'm here. Something shifted in Annie's face. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But perhaps the first sign that she was beginning to trust what he did, not only what he said. When they reached Michelle's car, Annie opened the passenger door, then turned back. Call me tomorrow. Daniel nodded. What time? Not before 10. 10:30? 10:15. He smiled. Deal. Annie started to get into the car, then paused. And Daniel? Yes? Today was good. For a moment, he could only nod. After the car pulled away, Daniel remained beside the curb with his phone still in his pocket. For most of his adult life, people had made room when he arrived. That morning, no one had. He had taken an ordinary seat near the back, waited his turn, and watched Annie receive something he had played no part in earning. It was the least important seat Daniel Whitmore had occupied in years. It was also the one he would remember longest. A week after the ceremony, Daniel asked Annie and Michelle to meet him at a law office 3 blocks from Whitmore Holdings. Annie arrived first and found Daniel in the conference area with a legal pad in front of him and no stack of prepared signatures waiting at her seat. That's promising, she said. Daniel looked up. What is? No surprise trust agreement. I learned my lesson. You learned one lesson. I'm pacing myself. Michelle entered a few minutes later, still carrying the canvas tote she used for work. She greeted Annie, then Daniel, and took the chair beside her daughter. Daniel waited until the attorney, Rebecca Shaw, joined them. Rebecca was in her early 60s, with silver-framed glasses and the direct manner of someone who had spent decades explaining expensive decisions to people who disliked hearing the details. Before we start, Daniel said, I want both of you to know nothing here requires a decision today. Annie looked at him. You're rewriting the will. Yes. Michelle's eyes moved to the folder near Rebecca. What about Catherine? Daniel answered before the attorney could. Catherine and I are separating. Annie's expression changed. Because of us? No. Daniel. No, Annie. His voice stayed firm. What happened recently forced us to talk honestly about a marriage that had been avoiding certain truths for years. That is between Catherine and me. Michelle studied him. Is she financially protected? Yes. Our marital agreement remains in place, and I am not trying to reduce what she is entitled to after 14 years. Michelle gave a small no. Daniel understood why she had asked. Rebecca opened the folder. Mr. Whitmore asked me to restructure several parts of his estate plan. The important point is that Annie is now recognized by name as his daughter. Annie looked down at the page. Rebecca turned toward her. For most of her life, Daniel Whitmore had been an empty space in her history. Now his name appeared beside hers in legal language. She did not touch the paper immediately. Daniel noticed. There's more, he said. I assumed there would be. You don't seem like a one-page kind of person. Rebecca smiled. Daniel almost did. The old will included a personal distribution for your mother. Michelle looked at him. Included? I'm changing it. Her eyebrow rose. You found me and immediately cut me out? Annie covered a laugh with one hand. Daniel shook his head. That came out worse than I intended. Much worse. He turned to Michelle. The old provision was written for someone I thought I might never see again. I don't want a legal document making decisions about your life now that you're sitting across from me. Michelle's expression softened slightly. Rebecca explained that Daniel intended to create an education and investment trust for Annie, with safeguards that would prevent company politics from controlling her personal finances. Annie looked at Daniel. How much? Enough that you will have choices. That is a billionaire answer. It is also the only number I'm discussing today. She shook her head, but there was humor in it this time. Rebecca continued. Annie would also be recognized in Daniel's long-term ownership plan for Whitmore Holdings, but no executive position came with it. Daniel added, if you ever work at the company permanently, you apply for the job. Good. If you're terrible at it, someone gets to tell you. Also good. If you fire them afterward, I'll know I failed. Annie smiled. Fair. Michelle glanced through the documents. What is the Carter Initiative? Daniel looked toward her. That part isn't finished. What is it supposed to be? A separate nonprofit fund. Paid internships for students who can't afford to work a summer without income. Legal support for employees facing discrimination. Scholarships for students from working families entering business, nursing, law, or public service. Michelle closed the folder. No. Daniel paused. No to which part? My name. You haven't heard the structure yet. I heard enough. Annie looked between them. Michelle continued. Do not put my name on a foundation because you feel guilty about what happened. That isn't why. You would not be creating it if none of this had happened. That's true. Then guilt is in the room somewhere. Daniel considered her point instead of rejecting it. Yes, some of it is. Michelle nodded. Thank you for admitting that. But guilt doesn't automatically make the work useless. No. Daniel slid the proposal toward her. Then help me build something useful enough that my feelings are irrelevant. Michelle looked at the first page. Daniel continued. Independent board, published grants, outside audits. You choose whether you want any role at all. If you hate the name, we change it. Annie looked at her mother. You'd be good at this. Michelle gave her a look. I know what you're doing. I'm sitting here. You are campaigning. A little. Michelle returned her attention to Daniel. If I agreed to advise, you don't get final say over everything. Agreed. You don't use my photograph in fundraising material without asking. Agreed. And no speeches about saving people. Daniel nodded. Especially that. Michelle closed the proposal. I'll consider it. Daniel smiled. That's more than I expected. Rebecca spent another 20 minutes walking Annie through the estate plan. Daniel said very little, unless Annie asked him directly. When the meeting ended, Annie left with Rebecca to ask a question about college expenses. Daniel and Michelle remained near the table. He gathered the papers slowly. Michelle noticed. You're taking an unusually long time to put paper in a folder. I'm thinking, that has historically been dangerous. He smiled. Then he asked, would you have coffee with me? Michelle looked at him. Coffee? Just coffee. You already had coffee with me once. That was an investigation. You interrogated me. I asked questions. You nearly drove straight to your mother's house halfway through. Daniel conceded the point. Then I'm asking for one that has nothing to do with letters, lawyers, wills, or 19 years ago. Michelle studied him. That's a lot to ban from one conversation. I can talk about other things. Such as? Daniel thought. Annie says my text messages sound like they were written by a disappointed school principal. Michelle laughed before she could stop herself. Daniel watched her, but did not push. One coffee, she said. His smile changed. One coffee. No promises. I'm not asking for any. Michelle picked up her tote. As she reached the door, Daniel spoke again. Michelle. She turned. I meant what I said in the office that first day. The old will was written for the woman I thought I had lost. His eyes moved briefly toward the folder containing Annie's new documents. This one is for the daughter I never knew I had. Michelle looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Then make sure she inherits more than your money. After she left, Daniel remained by the table. For once, he understood exactly what she meant. A few months later, Annie returned to Whitmore Holdings to finish the internship she had nearly walked away from. The first morning back, she clipped the same blue badge to her blazer and rode the elevator to the executive floor without anyone escorting her. People still knew who she was. Some greeted her differently than before, but Annie had stopped trying to measure every expression. She had decided there were only two things she could control: the quality of her work and the amount of space she allowed other people's assumptions to occupy in her head. Daniel respected the boundary. He did not promote her. He did not move her desk. He did not ask department heads to give her special assignments. When Annie submitted a week analysis during her first week back, her supervisor returned it covered in comments. She carried it into Daniel's office at lunch. Did you tell Marcus to do this? Daniel looked at the marked pages. Do what? Destroy 3 hours of my life with a red pen. I didn't know you submitted it. Annie inspected his face. You're telling the truth. I usually try to. That was not always your family tradition. Daniel winced. Fair. She sat across from him and opened the report. Apparently, my conclusion is unsupported by the available data. Is it? Yes. Then Marcus did his job. I was hoping you'd be more useful. I can fire him if that helps. Annie raised an eyebrow. Daniel smiled. That was a joke. You're getting better at those. Their relationship had developed through moments like this rather than through the dramatic gestures Daniel once imagined fatherhood required. They had dinner most Wednesdays. Sometimes Michelle joined them. Sometimes she did not. Daniel learned Annie preferred thin-crust pizza, hated people who talked through movies, and always checked a restaurant bill even when someone else was paying. Annie learned Daniel kept old jazz records in his study, called his own company's phone menu an insult to civilization, and still became uneasy during turbulence even on his private jet. He had offered to take her somewhere during her college break. She had told him she would consider it after he survived one full year without trying to buy her a car. Daniel had marked the date on his calendar. Michelle knew about that and thought it was ridiculous. The coffee Daniel had asked for after the legal meeting had become another coffee 2 weeks later. Then breakfast. Then an evening walk along the lake. Neither of them called it a second chance. They were too old to pretend 19 years could be erased by a few pleasant evenings. Some days they talked easily. Other days Michelle reminded him of something that still hurt, and Daniel had finally learned not to answer every wound with an explanation. Catherine moved into a condo downtown while the separation proceeded privately. She and Daniel spoke regularly about finances and the foundation work they had supported together. Their marriage ended without either of them pretending the years had been meaningless. Before moving out, Catherine told him, "Don't turn Michelle into the answer to everything that went wrong between us." Daniel replied, "I won't. She deserves better than that." "So do you?" Catherine accepted the answer. Eleanor remained the hardest part. She sent Daniel one handwritten note asking whether Annie might eventually agree to meet her. Daniel did not answer for Annie. He gave her the note. Annie read it at dinner, folded it, and placed it beside her plate. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "That decision is yours." "You really don't have an opinion?" "I have several." Annie smiled slightly. But my opinions don't get a vote." She kept the note. She had not contacted Eleanor yet. Daniel never asked when she would. On a Thursday afternoon near the end of Annie's internship, Daniel sat in his office with a cup of Earl Grey and a quarterly earnings report open on his tablet. The same city stretched beyond the windows, though the season had changed. He had just finished a call when Annie walked in carrying a folder. Daniel glanced at it. "No." Annie stopped. "No what?" "You're holding paperwork. That is generally allowed in an office. The last time you approached me with papers, I discovered I had an 18-year-old daughter." Annie placed the folder on his desk. "You survived." "Barely." She sat across from him. Daniel looked at the folder, then at her. "You're not about to ask me another question about my will, are you?" "Just one." Daniel immediately set his teacup down. Annie noticed. "Why did you do that?" "I've learned to respect your opening questions." She laughed. Daniel folded his hands. "Go ahead." Annie did not speak immediately. There was something different in her expression, enough that Daniel's humor faded. "Is everything okay?" "Yes." "College?" "Fine." "Your mother?" "Also fine." Daniel waited. Annie looked toward the window and then back at him. "I was thinking about something you said. That could be dangerous. You said you couldn't give me 18 years back." Daniel's face changed. "I remember. I was angry when you said it. You had every reason to be. I'm still angry about some of it. I know, but not at you for not knowing." Daniel said nothing. Annie continued. "I spent a long time thinking that if I accepted you, it meant I was saying what happened was okay." Daniel shook his head. "You never have to say that. I know that now." She rested one hand on the folder. "Mom said forgiveness isn't pretending something didn't happen. It's deciding what you want it to control after it happens." "That sounds like Michelle." "It does." Daniel smiled faintly. Annie looked at the clock behind him. "Are you doing anything tonight?" "I have dinner with 2 board members." "Oh." Daniel reached for his phone. "I can cancel." "I didn't ask you to cancel." "I know." "Then why are you already reaching for your phone?" "Because I'm learning priorities." Annie shook her head, amused. "I was going to ask if you wanted dinner with Mom and me." Daniel lowered the phone. "Yes." "You didn't even ask where." "I don't care." It's the diner. Even better. Annie stood and picked up the folder. Then she paused near the desk. Daniel looked at her. One more thing? One more. She took a breath. Are you free for dinner tonight, Dad? Daniel stopped. His lips trembled before he could control them. Months earlier, that same reaction had come from shock when Annie placed a will in front of him and changed the history he thought he knew. This time, there was no fear in it. Daniel stood. He did not move toward her until Annie stepped forward first. She wrapped her arms around him. Daniel closed his eyes and held her carefully. When they separated, Annie smiled. You're going to cry, aren't you? I'm considering it. Very executive of you. Daniel laughed and wiped beneath one eye. Does your mother know you were going to call me that? No. Good. Why good? I'd like one advantage tonight. Annie headed toward the door. 7 o'clock. I'll be there. And Daniel? He looked up. She smiled. Don't wear the suit. The door closed behind her. Daniel looked at the untouched tea, the earnings report, and the office that had once seemed large enough to contain everything he had worked for. At 50, he finally understood how incomplete that measure had been. Money could be transferred through a will. A company could pass from one generation to another. A family name could survive for centuries and still fail the people carrying it. What mattered more was what happened while there was still time to choose differently. 19 years ago, Daniel Whitmore had believed the greatest loss of his life was the woman who walked away. He had been wrong. The greater loss was the daughter he had never known to miss. And the greatest mercy was that he had still been given time to know her. This story reminds us that love without courage can still leave deep wounds. Silence may feel safer in the moment, but when prejudice, pride, or family pressure goes unchallenged, innocent people can pay the price for years. Daniel learns that money cannot replace lost time, and an apology means little unless it is followed by changed behavior. The story also shows that no family name, social status, or tradition should decide who deserves dignity and respect. Real justice cannot always restore what was taken, but it can begin when someone finally tells the truth, accepts responsibility, and chooses not to let the same injustice continue. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.